This is a very long countdown.
Hi, so we are now.
I believe so.
So hi everyone, welcome to the session 3.3 Advanced Action and Knowledge Translation. My name is Mukdarat Bangpan from the Epicenter Social Research Institute at UCL, and it's my pleasure to share this session. So before we start the presentation, I would like to thank the conference sponsors, Lanzhou University Health Technology Agency, and the Pan American Health Organization, WHO, for co-sponsorship for this conference. Also, UN, United Nations Population Fund, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and peers Partnership for Evidence and Equity in Responsive Social Systems, who have sponsored session at the conference. Today we have a great lineup to 5 presentations to talk about their innovative work and ideas for the co-production and knowledge translation from using arts as methods to engage with a wide range of key stakeholders. For each presentation, we have 5 minutes and 3 minutes for questions after each presentation. Please ask presenting to turn off the camera and microphone. For please use chat box. Introduce yourself, share ideas and research that you think is relevant to the discussion, or post any questions. I try to get to the questions after each presentation, and if we have more time at the end of the session, we will get back to the question as well. So we first start with Sylvia Paglaga and Stéphane Jacobzone from OECD on the topic mobilization evidence to enhance the effectiveness of child well-being policies. So hand over to you, Sylvia.
Hello. I hope I'm Sylvia Paglaga and I work at the public management and budget at the OECD. To present today our Stéphane Jacobzone on mobilizing evidence to enhance the effective well-being policies. So the goal of this study is to understand. Yes, if you can go to the next slide, please. The goal of the study is to understand how this can achieve success and impact evidence important as the child well-being as on the policy agenda, and it's important that these policies are evidence-informed. This work builds on existing OECD work on evaluation, and it's a fruit of cooperation with inclusion, sustainability, and equality at the OECD. It focuses on the methods that they use, the approaches, how they communicate, and how they international level effective child well-being policies. If you go to the next slide, it uses a mixed method systematic information on brokers from 24 OECD. This information to research the areas where investors research the communication strategy and were checked by the other institutions. Then we also use our user with senior experts. These were key to understand the success this institution have, and also the relationship with the key. They also offer the possibility to develop studies of best practices. Next slide, please. So, from the desk-based research, there is a great across knowledge brokers they need to look holistic. As you can see, the knowledge cover topics cognitive, physical, social. There is awareness of importance to focus on vulnerable children. Some children, of course, that requires more attention than others. If you go to the how do they do that? They are the need of targeting they have to be able to be impactful, have to speak both to practitioners, to decision makers, a variety of different levels, and these require a specific communication. By the graph on the right side, they use a different reports, but also scientific articles, pathways can be more specific, or policy advice on papers targeting decision makers. Next, so what we learned from the interview, the interview are very useful, and the success and failure gave us how can achieve impact. They help to identify 10 key policy messages that are inserted inside the report, and for the sake of time, I will title them. Effective, it's really important for them to engage with policymakers at level to being agenda front. It's very important for them to disseminate findings through active communication. So publishing evidence is not enough. It's really important to also engage with the stakeholders, make it very accessible and disseminate it. It's also important to set clear priorities for analysis after mapping the knowledge gaps and the opportunities. So there is already a lot of evidence out there on what and what doesn't work. So it's important for knowledge brokers to focus on the areas where there is less evidence, and this can be done through knowledge gap maps, etc. It's to achieve impact. We saw how important the reputation of the organization is, and is important because it's a way to ensure trust, and policymakers need to trust this organization to really adopt the evidence. And then another interesting aspect achieving impact is to also address the implementation challenges that come evidence. So we understand what works, but also to understand how it can be really implemented situation. If you go to the next slide, in our report messages, but together with a very interesting case. At the moment, we are reviewing the comments from our, and we're gonna publish the report in the. If you have a question, if you want to have further information, contact me or and thank you.
If I may, helicopter view, because we have a rather thick report with up to 80 pages. I try and see what was Center for Social in Australia, Belgium, Sweden, all over the place. And we, given the time constraints, we wanted to just give. I don't think there are any questions.
Thanks. You're on mute.
Sorry, Karin.
I think you're on mute, Karin. No. I can't hear you. I don't know, just me or not. Maybe you can type.
Maybe you can put.
Dara, can you help? Yeah.
Karin, can you hear us?
If you click and
Karin,
present it.
perhaps
We
try
can come back
if
to
you
Karin
unplug
later.
the
And
headphones, Karin,
any
and see if
others
that
have any questions? Karin, can you try again?
No.
No.
Can you try removing the headphones, and perhaps the headphones are the ones that aren't working if you unplug them. Oh, they are unplugged. Right. Perhaps try with the settings and see, just check to see whether the microphone is connected up. If you click on settings, and it might give you a choice of different audio, different. No joy there. The last thing I can perhaps I'll log a call here and see if someone can actually come and assist. Otherwise, I would say maybe try exiting and coming back in.
Yes. So while we're waiting for Karin, I think we can move on to the next presentation.
Unfortunately, that is Karin.
Yes. So the next one is Shoba.
Yeah.
Are you okay to present?
Yeah, Karin was supposed to present with me on a couple of slides.
Okay. Let me see who's next. Lisa, are you okay to presenting now?
I'm happy to present. Can you hear me?
Now, Lisa, I'm from University of Alberta, Canada. You're going to present on power of partnering with parents, effective knowledge, translation of child health evidence to diverse stakeholder groups. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And you can hear me okay? Up?
Yep.
Okay, good morning from Western Canada. I'm delighted to be here presenting about a research program in knowledge synthesis and translation that I co-lead with my friend and colleague, Dr. Shannon Scott. I want to acknowledge Dr. Sarah Elliott and Hannah Brooks, who direct and manage our research program. We're based at the University of Alberta, which is in Western Canada, and I have no conflicts of interest to declare. Next slide, please. So the goal of our research program is to co-develop with parents innovative and evidence-based knowledge translation, or KT tools, about common childhood conditions. So through our work, we seek to communicate complex health information and increase understanding among the users of our KT tools. We aim to generate meaningful connections and emotional impact by embedding narratives or stories about parents' lived experiences, and we believe that this will help facilitate efficient memory and retrieval of information. Next slide, please. So this slide, although I know that writing is very small on my screen, this slide describes our KT tool development cycle. It has been published, and the DOI is at the bottom of the slide if you're interested in looking at it in more detail. But key to developing our KT tools is involvement of parents, and this is visualized by showing our parent advisory group at the center of the figure. So we involve parents in the entire process. So starting at the top, we involve them in identifying topics that are a priority to them. We interview parents to understand their experiences having a child with the condition of interest. We conduct knowledge syntheses of parent experiences and information needs, as well as evidence-based management strategies. We integrate parent experiences and evidence to develop prototypes of our tools, and our tools are typically animation videos and interactive infographics. We have an iterative process of tool development where we involve parents as well as clinicians in vetting the tools at different stages of development. We then conduct usability testing on the near final products, and we disseminate the products through various dissemination strategies, which are also informed by parents. Next slide, please. So one of our key aims is to develop KT tools that are relevant to diverse stakeholder groups, including people from different linguistic and cultural communities. So we've done studies involving different stakeholder groups to understand whether they would use our tools in their current form, as well as how we can adapt our tools or develop them from the outset so that they are relevant. So many of our studies are published, and the DOIs are listed at the bottom of this slide. So we've conducted studies involving parents from French, Filipino, and Pakistani communities. We've also worked with parents from our local Somali community. We've worked with healthcare providers and knowledge brokers who serve local Indigenous communities, and we have a student currently working with the Manitoba Métis Federation. So over time, through parent feedback and our outreach projects with multicultural communities, we've developed a set of more diverse characters, including names, gender identities, and physical appearances. And we've also chosen and adapted formats so that they are more widely accessible. So this slide shows images from some of our tools, including along the bottom. The slide moved too fast, but anyways, there were tools that were translated for testing in French, Filipino, and Urdu-speaking communities. Next slide, please. Thank you. So to date, we've produced about 34 tools on 15 topics. They're all publicly available. And through this, we've learned many valuable lessons. First of all, relationships. They are at the root of what we do and are essential to develop trust and have meaningful engagement. In terms of format, we've learned that videos are acceptable across groups, although some groups prefer written text or captions within the videos, and some groups prefer oral traditions, and we're looking at how to consider this in our dissemination strategies. Accessibility is multidimensional and includes considerations of accessing the information, so ensuring that it is in plain language, accessing the technology, and this can be a barrier for some groups, and simply learning that the tools exist. So we have a wide stakeholder list of different organizations and involve healthcare providers and knowledge brokers as well to assist in disseminating the tools. We've learned that language translations, if done, need to be of high quality and require cultural competency. In terms of representation, parents have told us that they want characters that look like me. And so they have asked for diversity in family representations, things such as multi-generational households, varied methods of transportation or accessing health services, and familiar background and scenery. We've learned that extensive time and resources are needed to have genuine engagement with our end users, which are parents, and to develop tools that are meaningful and relevant. And finally, developing a parent advisory group has been critical to our success of developing KT tools that meet parents' information needs. However, this as well takes much time, energy, and unique skill sets to maintain interest and engagement. Next slide, please. So thank you very much for listening. That's a quick snapshot of our work. Again, our tools are available at echokt.ca tools. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Anyone has questions? You can type on the chat box as well. I have one question. You're talking about the tools. How long does it normally take to develop one tool to engage from the beginning to finish?
Great question. Our tools typically take 1 to 2 years to develop. and it's because of all the work we do along the way. So each step is almost an individual project on its own, going out and interviewing, recruiting and interviewing parents, and then doing some knowledge syntheses along the way, and then developing and getting lots of feedback from different groups on the prototypes. So they can unfortunately take as long as 2 years to develop. Although we're completing 6 tools at the moment that were funded last year, a year ago, related to the pandemic. And so we've really increased our speed on those. So we're developing those 6 tools within a 1-year period, but they do take a significant amount of time.
And you already have like a 35 tools?
Yes.
Okay, that's it. All right, thank you. We can come back if others have more questions at the end of the session. So the next presentation, and
did my settings work out? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can. Okay. Yeah.
So Karin is presenting on the topic assessing the quality of art and design research productions. So over to you, Karin.
Great, thank you. I think I'm one of the few scholars within the international review community that walks this thin line between science and art, really. And it is from this particular position that I intend to speak in terms of motivating a larger community of reviewers to consider artistically inspired methods in their reviews, but also to consider artistic evidence in their reviews. And one of the barriers of doing so is the lack of information on how to really judge the quality of a work of art as an outcome of a research project. So I thought it was about time to eliminate that excuse from the conversations that people are currently having. Next, please. So what you see in the back here is actually the result of a primary study in which we try to restore sense of belonging in citizens living in the outskirts of a bigger city. And I think the number of progressive, alternatively presented research findings will continue to grow with new generations of students coming up. And to bring this type of work into consideration in reviews, our first step was to conduct a systematic review in which we deliberately focused on evaluation criteria for creative and interactive science dissemination practices. And with creative, we refer to artistically, sensorially inspired ways to disseminate, like theater productions, installations, exhibitions, graphic novels, and so on. And with interaction, we refer to science output designed to involve citizens in the exchange and in the building of information. So the review question we had was, what evaluation criteria have been identified in previous research studies for judging the quality and impact of creative and interactive strategies of science dissemination? And what I want to present on is how we translated the insight of our reviews to something that storytellers, journalists, and other lay people could use, but also how we adapted the set of criteria found for use in a systematic review context. We started with 8,696 abstracts and had 18 studies that we eventually included in our review. Yeah. So this is actually a card deck or a card set that we developed for storytellers to judge their own research dissemination efforts. And they are not necessarily researchers. So we started from a curator perspective, more or less, in structuring the insights of our review. And we came up with broader categories such as the science behind the story. How do you judge that? The communication of the science story as such, mainly on how to present it so that it resonates more with the public. Curator tools, which refers to finding a balance between engaging people in and with science, but also to be partly entertaining so that people stick with the story. and the impact of the science story, which is how it connects to broader societal challenges. And each category has a different color, and each category contains 3 decks. And when you move down to the core deck, you will be provided with questions that stimulate that reflection on your own work. Okay. So the next slide is actually showing you the first deck of that card set. It has the basic categories in there. And as you can see, each of the cards comes with an illustration, but also with a short overview and instruction of what is addressed in each category and a couple of reflection questions. So in the science story part, for example, questions would focus on how the story can be verified as a science story. It also invites people into evaluating whether what they are dealing with is story based on science or a story about science itself. And for example, the impact part has reflection questions around how the science story affects people. So how this impact can, or whether it is measured, and also whether there's an opportunity for people to give feedback on the science stories outlined. The next slide shows you one sample, for example, on the impact trail, where you can see, if you click further on, Darak, that it spells out in a second more detailed dimension, which is about relatability, responsibility. How does this story evoke strong emotions? How is a safe environment created for people in which they can engage with these stories? In relation to curation, it's about how things are being brought together and how new knowledge can arrive from this collision of insights that are formally brought together. And the last tag then specifies, for example, in quantitative terms, what the effect of an art production is in terms of reach of people, new collaboration formed, awareness raised, knowledge gained, degree of involvement, everything that you can measure quantitatively, and affect measures, which is more operationalized as attitudes towards the storytelling practice, emotions, feelings that might arrive and that we need to take into account in science, mental disruptions or tactile activities evoked in response to an artwork. So this was developed primarily for storytellers. I also presented a format that would work well for systematic review authors who would consider art or design as evidence in their reviews to make them more comprehensive. So I translated that in 3 sets of criteria: the normative bit, the substantive criteria bit, and performative criteria. The normative it actually covers what we call the research-driven methodological angle of the work of art. So how does it come into existence? What is it based on? Substantial criteria are then more about the aesthetic standards of the work. It also covers things like how coherent is the work, what sort of coherent story is it telling, and it also talks about conceptual clarity and alignment. The performative is pretty new, I think, in a review context, but it's about the power of a work to affect and affect something, which is the main purpose of art, if you look at it, and about leverage, how the work actually connects to broader societal challenges it wants to address. So it's more about the value of the work in a broader perspective. The last 2 categories are probably things we are less familiar with, but with more and more research outcome presented in an alternative, multimodal way, I think these criteria could prepare us for the next wave of creative evidence coming in from young scholars that use different ways of presenting their research, including installations, exhibitions, storyboards, theatre plays, and so on, and so on. So hopefully this will motivate people more to actually consider art and design in their reviews. And I'm very happy to take any questions, comments you might have.
Thank you. And Any questions? One question there.
I think Lisa had a question for us. Asking, I don't consider myself artistic. Who are the people who can support this type of work? Very interesting, because I'm not trained as an artist either. Lisa, I use art and creativity much more as a vehicle to actually achieve a different type of outcome. So there's different ways of engaging with it. I engage art from a community-based participatory perspective. Other people might find that aesthetic dimension much more important, but usually this work is advanced in a collaboration of different types of profiles, having reviewers and researchers in there, combined with storytellers and people who have an artistic background who can actually help with the aesthetic part of the work. But also people who are not trained in the art come up with exhibitions, for example, photo voice related studies, where the outcome of research is pretty much an exhibition of narratively presented image material instead of the classical report, and that doesn't necessarily need artistic skills. It needs just a good eye of participative work and how to engage sensory modalities such as the visual or audio sounds or audioscapes, smellscapes in there. So not all of it is rocket science, aesthetic, high-fashioned artistic work, if that's helpful.
Thank you. So we can move on to, if no more questions, we can move on to the next presentation. Also on art, the use of art in setting priorities for reviews and equity perspective, presenting by Shoba Dawson from University of Bristol. Yes, here we go. That's Shoba. Hand over to you.
Thank you so very much. So Karin and I are going to take turns to present. So I'll hand it over to you, Karin.
Okay, so it's my pleasure to introduce this topic to you. And I'm going to do so from the fact that in the last couple of years, there has been a lot of interest in involving citizens and policymakers in prioritizing topics for systematic reviews. And we usually use conventional methods such as interviews, focus groups, group discussions, surveys to do so. And this works generally well for people who predominantly live by the power of their voice and the power to speak up when it is needed, which we call the privileged groups. But these methods tend to work less well in what we call hard-to-reach populations, or perhaps also disadvantaged populations whose voice risks to be lost in these exercises of priority setting. And our claim today is that art can be used as a vehicle to involve these populations in priority setting exercises. And we see this as a way of increasing the level of equity in terms of whose voice is heard in these types of debates. Shoba, over to you.
Thank you so very much. Next slide, please. So similar to what Karin mentioned, people who often take part in any aspect of health research do not necessarily reflect the diversity of the population, as often the methods of engagement do not promote inclusive involvement. Next slide, please. An example, thinking about the systematic review process itself at different stages, such as interpretation of study findings, dissemination of results, etc., creative methods have been used to communicate messages. So examples include using infographics, such as what you can see here on the slides, or even like live illustrations of discussions, really. So today what I'm going to be doing is presenting to you a piece of work that we were involved in to explore research prioritization using arts-based approaches for evidence synthesis. Next slide, please. Thank you. This work was undertaken in collaboration between Bristol, Oxford, and Kiel, where we worked with 3 different groups, really. The first group involved people who had early onset of dementia. The second group involved people with mental and physical health conditions. And the third group included women of South Asian heritage. All these groups are often considered hard to reach or easily ignored groups, if you like. We ran workshop with each of these groups to understand their experiences of healthcare. So in total, we worked with 25 people across the 3 groups. We also worked with 2 student artists and communicated with them before the workshops to brief them about the project and answer any questions that they may have had at that time point. They also attended these workshops and made notes, and they had the opportunity to ask questions. We also provided them with debriefing after the sessions to provide any clarifications. An important thing to make a note of is the fact that where it was needed and required, we provided translation and back translation support during the workshop as well, so that those who took part in the workshop and also the students could understand what was being discussed and communicated. This was something we did when we included women of South Asian heritage. So as you can see here, the students, sorry, can you go back to the previous slide, please? Thank you. So as you can see here, the students produced the following artwork, either to illustrate a key issue or to illustrate multiple issues within these workshops. We maintained regular dialogue with them via emails about what they were producing, but in no way did we influence what they were producing as such. So if you are interested in learning more about the priorities themselves or the lessons learned from our experience, you can find that in the publication, which is mentioned in this slide. One of the things that might be of interest to you all is that since completing this work, we have received some funding to undertake a scoping review to explore guilt of accessing care for people with physical and mental health conditions. And we have just submitted a grant application to explore communication issues between South Asian women and healthcare professionals about menopause. Next slide, please. Off to you, Karin.
Okay. So when we take participation serious, we might also have to reconsider the way we organize participative processes in prioritization exercises, where the methods about how to engage people are often decided upon top-down by the project team, and in which the target group is not necessarily represented. So I'm building here on a review of the literature on participatory methods and what is available there to create a map with potential methods that we are now consulting our own stakeholders on. And in this prioritization exercise, we are exploring whether citizens have certain preferences on how they would like to become involved in priority setting and what would consequently motivate them to speak to review authors. And so this pilot with this map of methods that we are displaying in a community of disadvantaged populations is conducted in the context of a project on prioritizing neighborhood areas where, for example, tactical urbanism interventions would be beneficial to increase sense of belonging. And we are exploring patterns in what people like and dislike in terms of how they are engaged to sort of create a better fit for purpose of the method with particular target groups, also to evaluate whether different groups would choose different methods in terms of how they want to be engaged. So it's small scale, but hopefully we can roll that out on a bigger scale in a later phase. We didn't decide who was going to end the presentation, Shoba, but I think the floor is open to questions now.
Thanks.
So I think we have a question from Lisa regarding how is your work funded?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. We are based in the UK. So our department is part of something called a School for Primary Care Research. So we received a small pot of funding specifically for public involvement and engagement, really. So through that, we received around £3,500 to undertake this piece of work.
It's always a scramble, though, when you do have a novel piece of research where you almost have to, you need the funding in order to push it through, but then you have to justify it prior to getting the funding. So it's always an achievement to get this.
Yeah, and also what I would like to stress perhaps is most of my work is actually unfunded. You know, I have a salary, I have students, I have PhDs and master students who experiment a lot in practice, and from these experiments, we write up some of our findings. So it's also a way of being creative with the resources you have in terms of people, in terms of places, in terms of network, but also the things you connect with. So we've recently written up a chapter, Creative with Resources in Qualitative Research, because we feel that people struggle a lot with that idea of, I need funding for this, while most of my work goes unfunded and it happens anyway. So don't fixate your brain always on, I need to have funding. There's millions of creative ways to put this into practice within the scope of other projects that might have a bigger goal there. But that would be my advice. Don't pin yourself down on being funded or not to bring change.
What's really great about that is that you're bringing up the next generation with it's almost like a research group you're bringing there. So you're recruiting collaborators as you go along. So we have another question there is, do you have a sense that the prioritization exercises can help to bridge the gap between the priorities of the voiceless and the priorities of the more privileged stakeholders?
Absolutely. But I suppose it depends on how you do it, really, because the current traditional conventional methods don't necessarily make effort or additional effort to recruit and include those who are missing from the prioritization process. So if you can think of involving and engaging them creatively, I don't see why you can't do that. So for example, another project that I'm leading on, we have managed to get some funding to identify research priorities for people who are often considered underserved in research. And we have just used methodologies such as World Cafe to work with Somali men, for example, about prostate cancer. And some of the priorities identified is now going to be taken forward so a consultant who's got interest in this area is taking it forward and going to be working with the group really.
Okay, so I'm going to hand, that was from Francois, and Francois, thanks you for the response. I'm going to hand back over to Makura.
Hi, yes. So the last Pierre and Maureen Smith on bridging citizens in evidence synthesis. Thank you.
Thank you. Maureen, are you able to get started?
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I may have to stop because I've got construction noise behind me, so hopefully you can still hear me. So welcome to our short presentation. I'm Maureen Smith. I'm the chair of the Cochrane Consumer Executive, and I'll introduce my colleague and trusted work partner, Francois-Pierre Gauvin.
We can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So it's not something new. We've been through more than 2 years of global crisis, a pandemic, and typically when we have a global crisis, many system and organizational leaders are turning to smaller groups to make rapid decisions because they're dealing with a crisis. There's so much uncertainty, so they tend to reduce the number of people engaged. And we've seen that in a recent review about patient engagement during the COVID-19 pandemic, that most partnership activities with patients tend to be reduced significantly as opposed to before the pandemic. But with COVID-N, the initiative we'll be talking to you today is that we believe, to the contrary, that more partnership is needed during a time of global crisis. Next slide, please. So the COVID-N, oh, perfect, thank you. COVID-N is a time-limited network that has come together to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. So the purpose is to bring a lot of key stakeholders to work together collaboratively to advance the evidence ecosystem. So we want to make the most of the explosion of interest and demand for evidence syntheses. We want to make the evidence synthesis ecosystem more robust and resilient in the future. So not just for the pandemic, but also if we have to deal with future global crises. And also we want to strengthen existing institution and processes. So you'll see in the next slide, we have more than 50 world global leaders in the field of evidence syntheses, technology assessment, and clinical guidelines. So if you can move to the next slide, that'd be great. Perfect. So you see here, so we brought those organizations together, as I mentioned, to be part of the COVID-N network, and also to make more rapid responses to the pandemic, try to stop the duplication of efforts. So instead of having tens and tens of research team working on the exact same topic, we could try to coordinate efforts to respond to the pandemic. And as part of that, Maureen will talk to you a bit about the citizen engagement strategy that we developed for this network. Maureen?
Thank you, FP. So how did it come about? Well, I heard about COVID-N through my work with Cochrane, and I contacted John Lavis and Jeremy Grimshaw and said, hey, citizens are making decisions at an unprecedented rate, and we should be at this table too. And they said, great, you and Francois-Pierre can co-lead the citizen engagement strategy. So we did bring the voices of citizens to ensure that their perspectives are all of the COVID-N work. And how do we do that? Well, we have mechanisms so they can identify and prioritize issues to be addressed along with all of the other stakeholders, ensure that new evidence synthesis are being conducted, address the questions and outcomes that are important to them, and involve citizens in their work, ensure that our pandemic response will reflect the values and insights of citizens, and consider and also consider all of the equity considerations, and provide strategic guidance to the work of COVID-N. So we're really woven throughout the whole project. Next slide. Back to you, FP.
So as part of the citizen engagement strategy, one of the big challenge was to try to develop a meaningful strategy to meaningfully engage citizens in this network. It was also quite challenging because we were dealing with a pandemic, a lot of uncertainty. We didn't always know what policymakers had to deal with in terms of upcoming challenges, whether it could be about vaccine effectiveness, about food insecurity, about economic responses. So we had to develop a very flexible and adaptable citizen engagement strategy. And our strategy rested on 4 key pillars. One of them was scientific and citizen co-leadership. And the 3 remaining pillars were about very concrete activities and mechanisms to engage citizens, system in place to support these activities, along with very, very concrete tools. But given the limitation in time for today's presentation, we'll just briefly talk about activities in systems that we put in place. So next slide, please. So in terms of activities, several types and very different activities were planned to bring in the voice of citizens in the COVID-N initiative. At the very top level of the governance of this network, we had the partner steering group, where we had citizens from across the world that were selected and took part in the regular meetings of the partner steering group. These were citizen leaders that we tried to identify from the regions of the World Health Organization, so the 6 regions of the WHO. Another interesting mechanism we put in place is an horizon scanning panel. So we had a panel of stakeholders, policymakers, researchers, and citizens from across the globe who came together once a month to discuss and upcoming challenges that they felt we would be facing during the COVID-19 pandemic. So based on their experience, based on what was happening in their country, in their communities, they could tell us this is an issue that seems to be popping up, which may require new research or which may require an evidence synthesis to support a response to that issue. We also had several working groups put in place. One of them was Equity Task Group and a Citizen Partnership Task Group. And lastly, very importantly for today's discussion is we had about 40 evidence synthesis teams from across Canada that joined the COVID initiative, and we put in place systems and activities to support the inclusion of citizens as members and partners in these evidence synthesis teams. And Maureen, with the next slide, will talk to you a little bit about the system we put in place, especially to support these evidence synthesis teams. Maureen?
Thank you. So yeah, it all sounds really good in theory, but how does it work in practice? So in Canada, we did get a grant after the first year to recruit a pool of citizens who we then trained to join some evidence synthesis teams. That was a Canadian project. We did a lot of mentoring, so continually engage with the citizens to learn and respond to their needs, guide them through the processes, provide help and advice if they face challenges, and offered training opportunities. We supported them by financially compensating them for their time based on the Spore Evidence Alliance appreciation policy. We did a lot of liaising. That was a big part of to foster internal and external collaborations in order to avoid duplication of work, sharing lessons learned, and offering mutual support. And finally, nudging. So that was really a system to steer evidence teams towards engaging citizens in their work. Many had never done that before, and really support them with tools, resources, and a contact person. So they could email us, and usually within a very, very short time frame that day, we would respond to them and try to address the issue and offer solutions and work with them. And that was a really important part of our work. And the same thing for our patient and citizen partners. They could contact us and let us know what was happening, and we would respond very quickly. That trusting relationship was really important in there. Next slide. So just to conclude, all of the choices that we're making in the pandemic have an impact on us, our loved ones, our neighbors, and the guidelines impact everyone's lives, as we know. So it makes sense that everyone's experiences are taken into account when the decision makers create the policies and guidelines. It really takes time and a concerted effort to create a culture of citizen engagement in evidence synthesis and in other sectors as well. We need to start now in order to be ready to collectively address other societal challenges, and lots of lessons learned that hopefully we can keep learning from and build on some of the successes that we have enjoyed. Back to you, FP, to wrap it up.
And perhaps as part of a conclusion, so we learned a lot from those 2 years of trying to nudge a lot of research teams into engaging citizens and supporting citizens from all walks of life to take part and share their insights to inform the questions being asked during the evidence synthesis, how to interpret the evidence, and so on, and also ways to communicate the evidence to a larger audience. And part of those insights also help us to inform the work of the Global Commission on Evidence to address societal challenges and the key role of citizens in the evidence ecosystem. And this afternoon, there's a full session on the Evidence Commission. So we invite you to take part in the session. It should be quite interesting. But just as a conclusion, we just want to acknowledge our collaborators at the COVID Secretariat and also all the citizens. There were many of them who spent a lot of time and resources and energy to support this initiative. And we're hoping to produce a manuscript soon that will provide additional data about specific tools and so on that we use. So we'll keep you up to date soon about this publication. Thank you very much.
Thank you both for the presentations. I think we got a few comments here from Karin saying that would like to learn more about the tools, resources available to reviewers to involve citizens. So I don't know if the teams have any suggestion in terms of where we can access to resources that you may have, can share.
Yes, and some of the resources are available on the COVID website. One of them that was developed by Maureen was developing a template where the research, the evidence synthesis teams could describe what they're hoping to do, which is not always very clear at the beginning. So what are you expecting from those citizens, their time commitment, at what stage of the review process are you hoping to engage them, and so on. So that template, we try to promote it among all the teams so that whenever they would contact us, we could communicate with citizens and have a clear, or at least a clearer idea of what would be the commitment to take part in the synthesis. And also, perhaps in terms of resources, most of that part was centralized within the Secretariat with myself and Maureen. So I think that helped a lot the individual teams to rely on some centralized support to find and match them with a group of citizens and so on. Maureen, I don't know if you have anything else.
You're on mute.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you can find our resources on the website. I put the link there. And again, I know Francois-Pierre already said it, but that relationship building that we did with our citizen partners and with the researchers, I think was really key. And that came back many times. People said, you know, we could contact you with an issue and get some advice. And we just felt there was a connection there between all of us. And we were all going to try to do this together. And I think it was really important. So I did put the link in for some of the resources. So that helps.
Thank you. I think we got one more question before the session finish. Can you elaborate a bit more on what the training for the citizens entails? Can this be packaged and disseminated more broadly to engage citizens in evidence synthesis efforts?
Or Maureen, I'll let you the question.
So one of our partners in COVID is the Spore Evidence Alliance. So we partnered with them, and two citizens co-created and co-designed a 10-hour course the first year on evidence synthesis, patient citizen engagement, evidence synthesis. We're preparing an article. We've cut a couple of webinars explaining it. We're now on the second course, which is a 15-hour course. So we haven't gone out and made all those resources available, but I think there's been a demand for that. So it was really training for citizens, by citizens for citizens, and we had a really high response rate to that. So the first year we had 25 people who went through the training, and then now we've got another cohort of about 25 people. So we are working on resources.
We got 10 seconds, and I would like to thank you all for this, your contribution for the presentation and questions that have, and see you